This is a story someone sent us about a Saturday evening that looked ordinary from the outside. A work event, a rooftop, two people at different points in the same marriage. The names aren't the point. What was chosen and what was noticed is, my name is Caleb Norris. I work in commercial insurance. I live in Pittsburgh, and on the Saturday this story begins, I was not thinking about any of the things I would later spend a long time thinking about. The firm's quarterly event was at Gaucho Paria, Argentina, in the Strip District, a good restaurant, the kind that books out the private backroom for corporate gatherings and does it right. I had been to 3 of these before. The format was always the same. Open bar at 6, food by 7. The usual rotation of faces from 3 departments who see each other mostly on Slack and use occasions like this to confirm that the other person is, in fact, a human being. I arrived a few minutes after 6. The back room was already going. The lighting was warm. The music was low enough to talk over, and the smell from the kitchen was doing most of the heavy lifting. I got a drink from the bar, nodded at a few people I recognized, and started working the room in the quiet way I do, moving slowly, listening more than speaking, not performing anything. Simone was already there. That was not unusual. She coordinated events for a living, and even when she was attending one rather than running it, she moved through a room the way someone does when they have spent years understanding how rooms work. She was near the far end of the space when I spotted her, in a small group, laughing at something. That was also not unusual. What I noticed, and I want to be precise about this, because the noticing matters, was not what she was doing. It was how she was doing it. She was with a few people I half recognized, and one I did not. The one I did not recognize was mid-30s, open collar, the kind of unhurried posture that signals a man who has never had to try very hard in a room. He was talking and she was listening in the particular way she listens when she is genuinely engaged, which is different from the way she listens when she is being polite. I could tell from across the room. That is the kind of thing you know after enough years with a person. I did not go over. I was not ready to go over, and I had learned long ago that the urge to cross a room quickly is rarely about the room. So I stood where I was, finished my drink, and went to refill it. Later in the evening, she found me and brought me into the group. The introductions were brief. She said her name, her firm, what she did, and then, and this is my husband, Caleb. Not Caleb who does this or Caleb who knows so-and-so. Just Caleb attached to the role. I shook hands with the man in the open collar. His name was Garrett. He worked with a client of hers. The handshake was normal. His attention moved back to Simone before the conversation had properly started. I stayed in the group for a few minutes. I said reasonable things and listened to what was said back. At some point, a photographer from the firm's communications team asked us to gather for a group shot, and we did, the 5 or 6 of us who were standing there. Without any visible decision, Simone turned toward Garrett. Not dramatically, just a small adjustment of where her body was pointed, the way people orient toward the thing that interests them most. I stood where I was. The camera flashed. We scattered back to our conversations. I spent the rest of the evening at a table near the window with a colleague from another department whose actual job title I have never been entirely sure of. We talked for a long time about a bridge closure on the south side that had eaten 40 minutes of our respective mornings earlier that week. It was a good conversation. The food was excellent. Their short ribs are not an accident. And by the time the evening started winding down, I had eaten well and drunk moderately and felt about as settled as a person can feel when something small has taken up residence in the back of their mind. On the drive home, Simone was in a good mood. She talked about the event, about who had been there, about a vendor contact she had finally met in person after 6 months of email. Her voice had a particular brightness that comes after a night that went the way she wanted it to go. I drove and listened. At some point, she looked over at me and said, "You were quiet tonight." "I don't know. Just taking it in, I guess," I said. She made a small sound that might have been agreement and looked back out the window. We drove the rest of the way without talking about it. The week after the event moved the way weeks do when you are watching something without being sure yet what you are watching. I went to work. I reviewed policy submissions, assessed exposure on a manufacturing account, had a call with a broker in Philadelphia who talked too fast and always needed things explained twice. None of this is relevant to the story, except to say that my days had a shape, and that shape did not change, and that the shape of it was one of the things I relied on. What changed was smaller. Simone's phone, which had always been present the way phones are now, on the table, in her hand, charging on the nightstand, started to be present differently. She had always checked it. Now she cradled it. A small adjustment. The kind of thing that only registers if you are already paying attention. On Wednesday that week, she said she was meeting a colleague for dinner and would be home by 8:30. She walked in at 9:10. She was not frazzled or apologetic about it. She said the dinner ran long and mentioned the name of a restaurant I had heard of. I said okay. She went to change her shoes. That was the whole exchange. On Thursday evening, I was sitting with my coffee when the event photos landed in the firm's shared channel. I found the group shot without trying hard. Simone was in the center of the frame, turned toward Garrett the way I remembered. I was at the edge of the frame, looking at the camera, which is what people are supposed to do. I looked at the photo for a moment, then put my phone down. The next day, a cropped version of a different photo from the evening appeared on her social media. It was a candid from earlier in the night. Her laughing, head back, the room visible behind her. Garrett was in the frame. I was not, though from the angle I could tell I had been just outside of it. The caption was something about good people and good food. I read it. Then I opened the screenshot function, captured it with the timestamp visible, and saved it to a folder I had labeled, simply, Notes. I do not know exactly when I started that folder. It had been there for a while. That Friday, Simone was in the kitchen when I got home. She was on her phone, back to me, and she did not hear me come in. By the time she turned around, she was already putting the phone face down on the counter, which was not something she had done before. I went to pour a glass of water. At dinner I asked, casually, how the Garrett account was developing, whether the proposal had moved forward after the event. She looked up. What? The proposal, I said. You were talking with him pretty extensively. I figured there was something in progress. I don't think I mentioned Garrett, she said. You might be right, I said, and went back to my food. She watched me for a beat longer than the moment required. Then she picked up her fork. That weekend, I went out with my recorder. I do this when the weather is right and the week has accumulated enough weight that sitting still indoors feels like the wrong answer. I took the equipment to the North Shore and walked along the river path toward the point, earbuds in, listening to what the recorder was picking up, the water against the bank, the bridge cables in the wind, the low industrial hum from across the river that never fully goes away. I stayed out longer than I had planned. The light went from gray to orange to gone, and I was still walking. Doug Hess texted me around 8 asking if I wanted to grab food. I told him I was already out, and we made plans for the following week instead. Doug is the kind of friend who does not ask questions when your answers are short. That is a specific and valuable quality in a person. The Sunday after that, I asked Simone a question over coffee. We were at the kitchen table, both of us with our mugs, the kind of quiet morning that used to be a regular feature of our weekends. I looked at her and said, "Are we good?" Not dramatically, not as an accusation. Just the question, sitting there between us. She did not answer immediately. She turned her mug in her hands and said that work had been a lot lately, that she felt stretched thin, that she needed some room to breathe. All of which might have been true. All of which was also not an answer to what I had asked. I waited. Then I said, "Is there something going on that I should know about? Because I'm getting that feeling." "No," she said. She met my eyes when she said it. "Why are you asking like that?" "I'm asking because I want to know. That's all," I said. She looked at me for a moment, and then said she thought I was making something out of nothing. I nodded. I finished my coffee. I rinsed the mug and left it in the drying rack. Later that afternoon, I added a note to the folder on my phone. Date, time, what was said, what was not. I am an underwriter by training and by habit. The work of underwriting is the work of looking at a situation clearly, not pessimistically, not hopefully, but accurately, and deciding what the exposure actually is. I had been doing that kind of looking for 3 weeks. The note was just documentation. It did not mean I had decided anything. That same evening, I met Doug for a run on the North Shore. He set the pace, which is always a little faster than I would choose on my own. We ran the path down to the point and back, which takes about 40 minutes at Doug's pace, and we did not talk for most of it because running at that pace does not leave a lot of room for talking. On the walk back to the parking lot, he said, "You seem like you're carrying something. Something's off." I'm keeping an eye on it," I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Yeah, you'll figure out when it's time." That was the whole conversation. We got to our cars. He said he'd text about food next week, and we drove off in different directions. I thought about what he said for most of the drive home, not because it was complicated, but because it was accurate. The confirmation arrived on a Tuesday evening. I was at the kitchen counter going through the week. A few bills, a building notice, the usual accumulation of things that require 5 minutes of attention and never get it. Simone was in the other room. The joint inbox, which we had set up years ago for household logistics, had a new message. I opened it without thinking. It was a loyalty points confirmation from a hotel in downtown Pittsburgh. A king room. Late checkout. The reservation was in Simone's name. The date was a Thursday, 3 weeks out. A Thursday she had mentioned to me 2 days earlier as a conference day. A full-day thing on the south side. Probably not home until late. I read the email once. Then I read it again. I sat with it for a moment. Not a long moment. Long enough to understand what I was looking at and to make one decision about what to do with it. I forwarded the email to my personal archive. Then I marked it unread and closed the inbox. I did not go into the other room. I finished going through the rest of the week's mail, which took another 10 minutes. Then I went into the kitchen and made dinner. When Simone came in and asked what I was making, I told her. She sat at the counter and we talked about her day, which had involved a venue walkthrough that had not gone the way she wanted. I listened and made reasonable responses. We ate. She cleared the plates. We went to bed at our usual time. I lay in the dark for a while after she fell asleep. Not spiraling. Not rehearsing. Just sitting with what I now knew. Turning it over the way you turn over a risk assessment when the numbers have just come back different than the model predicted. The numbers do not lie. The model is not always wrong. Sometimes the situation just is what it is, and the only question left is what you do with the information. The Thursday on the reservation was 3 weeks out. I had time. That mattered. The next evening, I drove to Point State Park after work. I parked near the fountain and walked down to the tip of the point where the rivers meet. The Allegheny coming in from the northeast, the Monongahela from the southeast, both of them giving way to the Ohio. I have always liked that spot. There is something in the specific geometry of it, the way the water has nowhere to go but forward. I took out my recorder and pressed record. I stood there for close to an hour, longer than I had planned. The light went flat and then golden and then started to fade, and I kept recording. The water, the wind off the river, a cargo boat passing in the middle distance, the particular ambient sound of a city that is working even when you are not. I did not think about what I was recording. I just let the machine do its job. On the drive home, I listened back to the first few minutes through the car speakers. It was good. The rivers sounded like rivers. That was enough. Over the next 10 days, I made a series of quiet decisions. The first was financial. On a lunch break, I called my bank and separated my direct deposit to a new personal account. The conversation took 11 minutes. The person on the phone was professional and efficient and did not need to know why. I thanked them and went back to work. The second was logistical. I had been looking at short-term rentals in Lawrenceville for about a week. Nothing urgent about the search, just information gathering. There was a one-bedroom on a side street, ground floor, concrete floors, a small south-facing window in the main room. The building manager was a compact, unhurried man named Frank who answered all my questions without embellishment. I viewed it on a Wednesday evening after work. I liked it. The price was reasonable, the lease was month to month after the first 30 days, and the neighborhood was close enough to everything I needed. I signed the paperwork before I left and shook Frank's hand. One evening during that stretch, Simone came into the kitchen and found me at the table with my laptop. She glanced at the screen, nothing visible to her, and said, "What are you working on?" "Just work stuff," I said. "Nothing urgent." She nodded and went to the refrigerator. The exchange was nothing, and it was everything. The third was personal. I called Renee on a Thursday evening. My sister and I talk regularly, but not always with much between the lines, and I did not want to give her the whole story before I had finished deciding what the whole story was. So I told her that some things were changing and that I was updating my emergency contact to her number. She was quiet for a moment. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Yeah, I think so." Yeah, I'm okay," I said. "Okay," she said. And then, after a pause, "Call when you need to." I told her I would. I removed Simone from my emergency contacts that evening and added Renee. I updated my beneficiary designations the next morning through my employer's portal during a gap between meetings. Neither of these actions took long. Both of them felt like setting something in order that should have been in order already. That Friday, I sent Doug a text. "Hey, moving this weekend." Long story. Food soon. His reply came back in 4 minutes. I'll bring the truck. I put my phone in my pocket and went back to the risk assessment on my desk, which was due by end of day, and did not care about any of this. That evening after work, I drove my truck to the Lawrenceville apartment and left it on the street out front, so I would not have to juggle 2 vehicles on Saturday. On the Saturday that I moved, Simone was at a full-day event she had been coordinating for 2 months, a corporate retreat for a client, held at a venue about an hour outside the city. She had left by 8 in the morning. Doug arrived at my apartment at 9. We worked without talking much. He is good at that, the particular kind of silence that is about efficiency rather than discomfort. We moved through the rooms methodically, clothes, the equipment I actually use, the coffee things, a box of documents, my field recorder and its case, the external hard drive where I keep the recordings. 2 trips to the truck. 2 trips from the truck to the Lawrenceville apartment. By noon it was done. Before I left the apartment for the last time, I sat down at the kitchen table and read through the document I had drafted the night before. Single page. Typed on the work printer, because I still keep a printer. I read it once, made no changes, and signed it. The document covered the following: that I had moved out, stated simply, which accounts I was closing, and on what timeline. That her access to my card ended that day. That the streaming subscriptions would run through the end of the month and then transfer to my personal plan. That going forward, email was the right channel for anything logistical. I left it on the kitchen counter, centered, weighted down by the salt shaker so it would not move. Then I walked through the apartment once, not looking for anything, just doing the thing people do when they are leaving a place they have lived in for a while. The rooms looked like rooms. They did not look like the end of something. Maybe that is the way it always is. You expect the space to register the event, and instead it just holds its shape. I pulled the door shut behind me. The latch caught with the small, clean sound it always made. I walked to Doug's truck and he drove me to Lawrenceville. That evening, alone in the new apartment for the first time, I unpacked in the order that made sense to me. Recorder on the windowsill. Coffee equipment on the counter. The grinder. The kettle. The pour-over setup. I was done in under an hour. I made coffee and sat by the window. Outside, the street was doing what streets do on Saturday evenings. People heading somewhere. A few voices. Music from the bar 2 blocks east cutting through at intervals. It was not quiet, but the noise was theirs, and that was different from the noise inside a shared silence, which is a different kind of loud entirely. I sat there until the coffee was gone. Then I rinsed the cup, set it in the drying rack, and went to bed. Here is where the story pauses for a moment. Not to explain what Caleb did, or to argue that he was right, but to look at what was actually happening, because there is something in this situation worth sitting with before we move on. Most of the time when a relationship ends, it doesn't end all at once. It ends in the decision someone makes to stop choosing the other person, and in the decision the other person makes to wait and see if anyone notices. Caleb noticed, and then he had to decide what to do with what he had noticed. That decision, not the discovery, but what came after it, is what this story is actually about. Because here is the thing about the kind of betrayal this story describes. It does not arrive as an event. There is no single moment you can point to and say, there, that is where it happened. It accumulates in small reroutings of attention, in a phone angled away, in an introduction that leaves something out, in a Thursday that turns out to be something other than a conference. By the time there is proof, the person who has been paying attention already knows. The proof is not the revelation. The proof is just the confirmation of what the body already understood. And the moment of that confirmation is not a moment of power. That is the part nobody tells you. It is a moment of grief. Not loud grief, nothing dramatic. Just the specific, quiet loss of a thing you had been hoping, without quite admitting it, was not what it appeared to be. It has a clean floor because there is nothing left to trip over. But it is still grief. What Caleb did in the days that followed was not revenge, and it was not a performance. It was a person moving from absorbing a situation to deciding what he was actually responsible for. Not her choices. Not her consequences. His own behavior, his own structure, his own next step. That is a narrower thing than it sounds. And it is harder than it sounds, because the pull toward reaction, toward confrontation, toward demanding an explanation, toward making sure she knows that you know, is a strong pull. The pull comes from a real place. It is just not always the right direction. We are not here to tell you he got it perfectly right. We are here to ask, what would you have done with that same information? And what would it have cost you to act on it? That question does not have a clean answer, but it is worth asking. Because what a person does when they finally know something they did not want to know says something about them. Not about the other person, not about who was right or wrong. About them, about what they value and what they are willing to protect. Keep that in mind as we go forward. The first contact came 4 hours after I moved out. Simone called at 3 in the afternoon. I was unboxing the last of my things in Lawrenceville when the phone lit up. I watched it ring and then stop. Then I sent a text. Look, just email me. It's easier that way. She called again. I sent the same text. 10 minutes later, an email arrived. A long one. Working through the note I had left, questioning the accounts, asking what I thought I was doing, cycling through registers I recognized. Disbelief, then irritation, then something closer to hurt. I read it once. Then I drafted a reply that covered the practical items in the order she had raised them and sent it. The next 3 days followed a similar pattern. She sent messages, some of them long. I responded to the logistical content and did not respond to the rest. When she wrote, "This is cold," I wrote back, "I'm not trying to be cold. I just need it in writing so we're both looking at the same thing." When she asked if I had really thought this through, I wrote that I had been thinking it through for several weeks, and she was welcome to email me a list of items she wanted addressed. Her card was declined at a gas station on a Wednesday. She texted me about it. I replied once, pointing her back to the note on the counter, and confirmed that the account separation had processed as planned. She called it petty. I did not reply to that. On a Thursday evening, she appeared at my building. I heard the buzzer and looked at the intercom screen, and there she was, standing at the entrance, wearing the coat I knew well and holding her phone with both hands. I went downstairs, pushed the lobby door open, and stepped outside. I did not invite her in. "I want to talk," she said, "without all the rules." "That's not how this works right now, Simone," I said. She looked at me for a moment in the particular way she looks at things when she is deciding how to get past them. Then she tried to move around me toward the door. I stepped to the side, just enough, not aggressive, just present, and she stopped. "Email," I said, once quietly. She held her eyes on mine for a few seconds. Then she said something short and sharp that I will not repeat here, and walked back to her car. I watched her go, then went back inside. The following week, I went to the old apartment to do a property inventory, a list of the furniture and household items so we could decide in writing what went where. I had emailed her the date and time in advance, and she had confirmed. When I arrived, she was there with a coffee and a look that said she had decided to try a different approach. The approach was warmth. She asked if I wanted anything. I said no. I started photographing items and noting serial numbers. About 30 minutes in, I heard voices. She had put a speakerphone call on in the kitchen. 3 voices I recognized, friends of hers. All of them talking at once in the bright, urgent way of a group call that has rehearsed its points. I could hear what they were saying. I finished photographing the bookcase, the television, the desk, the record player. I wrote the items into the spreadsheet I had started for this purpose. Then I emailed her a copy of the inventory with a note about pickup timing, said I would be in touch, and left. She followed me to the door. "You're not going to say anything?" "About what?" I said. She did not have an answer that fit what was actually happening. I walked to my car. A week after that, she left a voicemail. The tone was different from the earlier calls, softer, more careful. She talked about a trip we had taken a few years back, a long weekend somewhere warm, the kind of memory that sounds like an argument when you use it correctly. She said she thought there was still something worth talking about, if I was willing. She said she knew things had gotten complicated, but that our history deserved more than an email chain. I listened to the voicemail once, sitting in my car outside the Lawrenceville apartment after work. Then I went upstairs and wrote her a short email. I kept it to 3 sentences. "I'm not going anywhere, but I need honesty to be the starting point, not something we work up to. When you're ready for that, I'm here." I sent it and closed the laptop. There was one more exchange, and this one did not go the way I would have preferred. She called on a Thursday afternoon, and for reasons I will not fully excuse. It had been a long week. I had not slept as well as usual. She said something in the first 30 seconds that landed badly. I answered. The conversation escalated faster than I intended. At some point I said, "You keep calling this punishment. It's not. You just don't like where your choices landed. That's not the same thing." I said it harder than I meant to. I heard it land. I hung up shortly after. I sat in the kitchen for a while. The sharpness of that line was not wrong, exactly. But it was more than the moment required, and I knew it. I did not call back to take it back or to apologize. But it sat with me for the rest of the week in a way the other exchanges had not. I am telling you this because the story is more honest if I tell you this. The legal meeting was at 9 in the morning, on a day in late spring when Pittsburgh was trying to decide between rain and gray and had settled on both. The office was downtown, one of those firms that have been in the same building for 30 years and have furniture to match. The conference room smelled like paper and the particular kind of quiet that comes from good soundproofing. My attorney, a careful and precise woman named Harmon, had reviewed everything twice and said we were ready. I trusted that assessment. Simone arrived on time. She had an attorney with her, a man I had not met, who made a brief friendly comment about the weather that nobody responded to. We sat on opposite sides of the table. There were 2 folders, 2 pens, and a clock on the wall that nobody was watching. We worked through the agreement section by section. The terms were what we had negotiated over email across the previous 2 weeks. The apartment and its lease transferred to her name, my name removed. The truck and its title stayed with me. The shared accounts closed. No spousal support either direction. The personal property divided according to the inventory we had documented. Toward the end, before we reached the signature pages, Simone looked up from the folder. "I think we could still fix it," she said. Her voice was quiet. Not the performance of quietness, the actual thing. "If you wanted to." I looked at her. I thought about the hotel email, about the way she had turned toward Garrett at the event, about the Sunday morning when I had asked her a direct question and received a careful non-answer. I thought about the version of us in the apartment on ordinary Tuesday nights, which had also been real. "I just needed you to pick me," I said. "Not as a backup. Actually pick me." And I don't think that was ever really on the table. She looked down at the folder. Her attorney made a small sound and turned a page. We signed. She left first. I watched the elevator doors close behind her and sat for a moment in the conference room while Harmon gathered the copies and the paralegal tidied the table. Then I picked up my folder, thanked them both, and walked out into the day. The walk to the parking garage was about 4 blocks. I did not rush it. Somewhere in the second block, something moved through me. Not relief and not grief, something that did not have a clean name. I walked slowly and let it pass. Then I stopped walking for a moment, there on the sidewalk, and said what I actually thought. There is a version of this story where I left too cleanly, where the calm was its own kind of wall, something to hide behind rather than something earned, where a different man might have stayed uncomfortable for longer, asked harder questions earlier, made room for a harder conversation before making room for an exit. That version might also be true. The decision to leave with structure rather than noise is not automatically the right one. It's just the one I made. I stood there with that for a moment. Then I kept walking. From the parking garage, I drove to Point State Park. I parked and walked down to the tip of the point, to the place where the Allegheny and the Monongahela give way to the Ohio. I took my recorder out of my jacket pocket and held it in my hand, without pressing record. The rivers were doing what rivers do. Gray and wide and uninterested in the things happening on their banks. A light rain had started, fine enough that it was more mist than rain, and the surface of the water had that particular texture, thousands of small rings appearing and disappearing. I stood there for a long time. Eventually, I put the recorder back in my pocket and walked to my car and drove home. The month after the signing was not triumphant. I want to be precise about that. Some things improved in the way that things improve when a sustained effort is over, the way your shoulders drop after you have been carrying something heavy for a long time and finally set it down. But setting something down is not the same as things being good. It is just the beginning of your arms feeling normal again. Work was steadier. Nothing dramatic happened at work. No new recognition, no advancement, no moment where someone said they had noticed how together I seemed. It was just steadier. I could follow a long conversation without part of my attention going somewhere else. I could read a submission and respond to what was actually in it. These are small things. They added up. Doug and I had dinner on a Thursday at a place in Shadyside. We ate well and talked about the usual things, his sister's renovation, a road trip he was planning in the fall, a podcast we were both following. Near the end of the meal, he looked at me and said, "You seem like yourself." "Yeah," slowly. "But yeah," I said. He nodded, and we split the bill. The field recording came back properly. During the weeks of the aftermath, it had been occasional and distracted, something I did to move through time rather than because I was fully in it. Now it was what it had always been, a practice that required me to be still and pay attention. I recorded the Allegheny at dawn on a Saturday, standing on a bridge while the city was still mostly asleep and the light was doing something complicated with the water. I recorded a freight train moving through the Strip District at 4 in the morning on a night I could not sleep, standing on a corner with my earbuds in. The recorder pointed at the sound. I recorded rain on the fire escape of the Lawrenceville apartment, which turned out to be one of the better recordings I have made. Something about the angle and the texture of the old metal. None of it meant anything beyond itself. That was the point. That had always been the point. A mutual friend, a woman named Paula who had known both of us for years, texted to ask if I would be open to a conversation with Simone at some point. She said she was not pushing, just asking. I wrote back that I would be open to it when honesty was where it started, and that I meant that straightforwardly, without conditions attached. Paula said she understood. We left it there. The photo arrived on a morning in June. No text, just an image and a message from a number I still had in my contacts under her name. I was at the kitchen counter, coffee in hand, not quite ready to start the day. The photo was from a trip we had taken 4 years ago, maybe 5, a long weekend somewhere on the coast, the kind of place you go when you need to remember that the world is larger than the thing you have been inside of. In the photo, we were sitting on a low wall somewhere with the water behind us, and the light doing what late afternoon light does near the ocean. We were both looking at the camera. We were both smiling. We looked like people who did not yet know what was coming. I held my phone and looked at the photo for a long time. I did not archive the photo. I did not block the number. I set the phone on the windowsill next to my recorder and went to pour a second cup of coffee. Standing in the kitchen, waiting for the kettle, I thought about that afternoon on the coast. The wall we had been sitting on, which had been warm from the sun. The way the light had been so good that we had both noticed it at the same time and said so. The feeling of being somewhere together with no particular agenda, which is a specific kind of good feeling that is harder to come by than it sounds. I didn't feel like I'd gotten out. I felt like something had ended, and I was still standing in the place where it used to be. The kettle finished. I poured the coffee, carried it back to the window, and stood there for a while, looking out at the street. The recorder sat next to the phone on the windowsill. Both of them quiet. Both of them doing exactly what they were supposed to do. When someone you trusted starts performing their life for a different audience, do you say something first, or do you watch until you're certain? And does it matter which one you choose, if where you end up is the same place either way? Leave your answer below. There isn't a clean one.